going to edge away during Friday and take the rain with it. So yes, a damp start for many, but certainly in the west likely to brighten up on Friday with some sunny spells. Eastern areas may stay a bit glum, but it will generally turn dry. Still pretty cold in northern Scotland, but elsewhere temperatures just on the rise. And look at this in the south, 16, 17, 18, maybe even a little higher, where we see some lengthy spells of sunshine. A mixed bag into the weekend. Drier on Saturday initially, but then some heavy showers developing, but for all, turning warmer.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Saturday nights on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
Saturday nights on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. Well, the illegal migration bill is being debated as we speak, but can Suella Braverman win her battle to stop the boats by starting deportations? We'll try and find out why a record number of people are taking days off work sick. The self-inflicted wound of VAT on foreign shoppers, and police numbers hit a record, but I can't see them out there on the streets, can you? We'll debate all of that in a moment, but first, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you, and good evening. The top story on GB News tonight. The first British people evacuated out of Sudan in northeast Africa have landed in the UK. It's unclear how many people were on board the flight, but it is understood more than 300 people have been evacuated so far on 4 flights. A total of 8 are planned. It's estimated around 4,000 British people were stuck in Sudan. Hundreds of people have been killed since fighting between the Sudanese military and rival paramilitary forces broke out out about a fortnight ago. A 72-hour ceasefire is currently holding, but the Prime Minister is warning the next 24 hours are critical as British forces race to rescue more people left behind. One man arriving at Stansted thanked British troops for bringing him home.
It's absolutely fantastic to be back. It's been a nightmare. Never seen anything like this before. We saw it on television before. We never thought it was going to happen to a peaceful country like Sudan. The Khartoum is just like a ghost city. Everybody's leaving Khartoum now. Ever so grateful to the British servicemen and women who risked their lives to come to Sudan and help us out.
Well, the Home Secretary says there are no plans to introduce safe routes for Sudanese people who want to seek asylum in the UK. Suella Braverman insisting the government's priority now is rescuing British people. Now, the MP Andrew Bridgen has told GB News he's very disappointed that the Conservative Party has leaked details of his expulsion from the party. That happened on the 12th of April on a recommendation from a disciplinary panel. And it's after he questioned the efficacy of the COVID-19 vaccine rollout as he retweeted a comparison of it to the Holocaust. Clinical trials have shown COVID vaccines are effective and safe. Mr Bridgen said he will stand again at the next election. The government says it has met a 2019 manifesto promise to recruit 20,000 new police officers in England and in Wales. The Metropolitan Police in London is the only force in the country to have not reached its own individual target, saying they're about 1,000 officers short. The ongoing recruitment programme is expected to cost £18.5 billion over the next decade. Both the Police Federation and the Labour Party say there are fewer police officers per head of population now than there were in 2010. Now, the High Court has today heard a claim that the King and Queen Consort's phone calls were intercepted by the publisher of the Sun newspaper in the 1990s. The Duke of Sussex made the allegation in his claim against News Group newspapers. He's suing them over what he alleges is unlawful information gathering. Stories allegedly published in the Sun newspaper as a result of those headlines led to Heir to the Throne and the Midnight Caller splashes. Well, the hearing's expected to finish tomorrow. And the King and Queen Consort have unveiled the stage set for this year's Eurovision Song Contest. The royals turned on the lights, actually, at Liverpool Arena before being given a behind-the-scenes tour. Charles told the UK's entry May Muller he'd be egging her on. The competition will take place a week after his coronation. The UK was chosen to host the contest on behalf of Ukraine. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and on the TuneIn app. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. Well, the illegal migration bill has been debated all afternoon in Parliament and is being voted on as we speak. And it's very interesting, leading up to this debate and vote, how the language has changed significantly. I told you yesterday about Robert Jenrick's tone, and overnight, Suella Braverman has made it very clear that some of those coming into this country have values that are at odds with us and our society, and that it's leading to an increased level of criminality. Now, I believe both of those things to be true. That doesn't mean I've ever suggested that everyone coming is a bad person, but too many bad people are being allowed in. But the tone of the language is something we don't expect really to see from British governments, which I guess shows you the depths of the problem that they're in. So the stated aim of this bill is that those who come illegally into the United Kingdom can be deported. They will not be allowed to lodge a claim for asylum. So it sounds pretty tough. It sounds like red meat for the red wool. But there are many saying this would be in conflict with our international obligations and in particular with our signatory to the European Convention on Human Rights. So, will Suella win this battle? Give me your view. Farage at gbnews.uk. UK. Let's go straight to College Green and be joined by our political editor, Darren McCaffrey. Darren, I'm struck that I know there are people like Theresa May, Tim Loughton saying, look, we need protection for under 18s. Of course, that's if they're genuine under 18s. We need to be careful about those that perhaps are being trafficked into the country against their will. But it seems that actually there's a relative level of unity within the Conservative Party around this legislation. You've been watching it all afternoon. What's your impression?
Yeah, indeed, and that is going to be reflected, I think, Nigel, in the vote in, the next couple of minutes or so, and indeed in the fact that the government is not looking at any type of rebellion tonight, and that is because many of those amendments that could have been put forward by backbenchers are simply not going to happen this evening. Now, there are votes on 5 different amendments. So far, most of them have been rejected. That's because they've been put forward by the Labour Party. And as I say, on the main subject of the bill, the third reading, we are expecting that to pass, and then it'll ping over to the House of Lords. As you say, a few interesting things today. First of all, people like Theresa May, Ian Duncan-Smith, 2 former leaders, of course, spoke out quite strongly about some of the unintended consequences, potentially, of this bill, particularly around modern slavery. We know that Tim Loughton has raised concerns about child refugees potentially being held in detention, and for how long. And we know, on the other side of the argument, if you like, to a degree, some Conservatives have been uneasy that the government's not taking a tough enough line when it comes to the European Court of Human Rights. All in all, what the government have effectively done today is said, we've heard what you've got to say, we're listening to you, and you know what? Behind closed doors, we will try and bring in some of your concerns as this process continues. And that's why we didn't see any amendments or indeed rebellions put forward tonight. As you say, in relation to the European Court of Human Rights, again, fascinating in terms of the language being used. At the moment, the government's position effectively is that they don't think it is necessary to withdraw from the European Court of Human Rights. Though Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, when asked about this today, said that her personal views were well documented on the issue, i.e. hint, hint, you know what, that's what I want to see. I'm not sure how that does for Cabinet collective responsibility. And also, as you said, the language has toughened up in the last 24 hours or so. Robert Jenrick yesterday talking about how he thought uncontrolled migration would cannibalise compassion in this country. Suella Braverman today saying that she thought that migrants getting involved in drugs and violent crime is at odds with British values. Now, there are clearly a lot of criticism of this bill from the opposition. Labour thinks it's immoral. They will point out that criminality existed before migrants started arriving in these shores, certainly in small boats. But the government will be pleased that so far this is going through Parliament pretty easily. There'll be a big battle in the Lords, but it's a battle, I think, Nigel, the government will quite relish.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. They want to show people they're on their side, especially in the Red Wall. Darren McCaffrey, thank you very much indeed. So it is this question, this real question of compatibility with our international obligations that I want to discuss with Paul Turner, Head of Chambers and Immigration Barrister at Imperium Chambers. Paul, you know, you can see what the legislation says, and we discussed the political reasons why it's being done. If this legislation, which will go through the third reading tonight, and let's say it goes through the House of Lords, would this legislation be compatible with our international obligations?
No, and the Secretary of State is fully aware of that. Before any bill is put before Parliament, there is an obligation under the Human Rights Act, which was brought in 1998, for the Minister to say whether the Act is compatible with the Human Rights Act or with the ECHR. And
yeah, just to be clear for our viewers and listeners, the Human Rights Act was where we basically incorporated the European Convention into British law.
Tony Blair, bringing human rights home, it was a slogan. They love a slogan, don't they? In it, there's an obligation for the minister who introduces it to say whether or not the law that they're proposing is compatible with our obligations under the ECHR. She was unable to say that, and it is said that she has been advised that there is a more than 50% chance that the law is incompatible with our European obligations. Now, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors and talk about it, and as we've heard from the political side, they've ramped up the volume. But it's interesting that we've seen today individuals such as Sir Geoffrey Cox QC or KC, a former Attorney General, and he raised a valid point. Under the ECHR, one can apply for what's called an injunction, a Rule 39 application, and the ECHR will give an indication. That indication is not legally binding. The government can still remove the person. There's no need for this legislation. The government can...
So why would there... So what happened? I mean, last year there was a plane on the tarmac about to send a few people off to Rwanda, and at 10 o'clock at night, an unnamed so-called judge in Strasbourg says, no, you can't do it.
Now,
and that's what Suella Braverman's trying to overcome.
I think the problem is, in reality... The plane that was on the tarmac, and I'm not quite sure whether it was 50 or 60 people that they hoped to get on the plane, the vast majority, so I think 30 or 40 people, if not more, were taken off by UK judges under UK laws, and that there were only about 2 or 3 people left on the plane when the ECHR...
OK, so those that were taken off by UK judges under UK law now would not be taken off if this legislation goes through. Although each case is specific, I know.
I think it's valid. The question raised is valid, but the issue is, again, taken off to where? Because the whole Rwanda policy is in the Court of Appeal. It hasn't yet been heard yet in the Court of Appeal. And there's every possibility that if the government loses, that they'll take it to the Supreme Court, and if the applicants lose, they'll take it to the Supreme Court. So really, we have a stasis in this situation where the Home Office and the irony, I would say, is they call it the illegal migration bill because any lawyer would say it's plainly illegal, it's ridiculous, they are trying to legislate their way out of a real problem.
Well, they're trying to show the voting public they're trying. I think that's what they're trying to do. But Paul, you know, if doing what we want and doing what a majority Democratic position supports, and I think the Brexit vote and an 80-seat majority make it very clear that they wanted our government to control the borders and do what they have to do. There is a democratic mandate to do this, and that's an important point. If our international obligations conflict with that, then surely the logic is we change our international obligations by leaving ECHR.
Well, there's no need to leave the ECHR if you process the asylum claims quickly. There's a backlog of about 166 asylum claims. 166,000, yeah, and it's increased by 5% over the last few months. So it's easy to focus on this legislation if they can legislate themselves out of trouble. Last year, I think it was in about June, they made it a criminal offence to enter the country illegally. 45,000 people entered the country illegally. Of that, you'll be surprised to know, Nigel, only 100 were prosecuted. It doesn't send much of a message. So you can legislate as much as you want. Two things. When you've got these people... And where I think Suella Braverman has made a huge error is she has given herself a duty to detain and remove the people. She's imposing a duty on herself. Now, the question is, if the estimated 80,000 people arrive, where are they going to put them? I mean, they could put them in Napier Barracks, where they put them before, which was run by a private company, which was found to be people who were held illegally.
Or I'll finish on this point. We just do what the Australians did. We say to hell with our international obligations. They towed them back to Indonesia. Maybe that's what we're going to have to do.
Well, do you know what? There's a compromise there, Nigel, and really looking at it is... I believe we promised the French 500 million. I mean, as I say, we've given the Rwandans 120 million. We've given 500 million to the French. We've got what's called juxtaposed immigration control. Anyone that's been across the Channel knows that you get checked by the French in England, checked by the English in France. Why don't we put the centres in France? We're giving the French all the money. Why don't we just build the centres there? Process the claims in France.
Yep, and anyone in the English Channel in a dinghy gets taken to a centre in France.
And then they can have their claims processed,
right.
And
well,
if they're successful, they can come to the UK.
If we can stop them landing on the shore in this country, we may just deal with it. Paul Turner, thank you. And you can see it is a complex debate, but it's a really important one, and it's something that really could cost the Conservatives the next general election. In a moment, Police at record numbers. Well, that sounds like great news, but I don't seem to see any of them. In a minute, I'll try and find out why.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "No, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Saturday nights on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight.
Saturday nights on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, some of your thoughts. Can Suella win this battle? One viewer says, of course not. Just like with Brexit, there are too many people who will get in her way. I think you mean by that the lefty lawyers. Ian says, Suella might win in Parliament, but by the time the unelected Lords, unelected civil service and unelected judges are finished with it, it'll be a victory in name only, just like Brexit, Ian, you cynic. And Sue says, no chance. It's time to leave the ECHR. Sue, that's what I think as well. But we'd be told that if we did, we'd be an international pariah. Now, at 9:30 this morning, a tweet went out from our Prime Minister. Gosh, he was really, really pleased with himself because the 2019 manifesto commitment to increase the number of police officers by 20,000 in England and Wales has been met. Wow, he seemed so happy with it. But my initial gut reaction was, really? Where are they? I haven't seen them. Oh, I see them in cars driving around. Or normally sitting on the side of the motorway, to make sure you're complying with the speed limit, but I don't see them on the streets. I see no evidence that police numbers are now at record levels. Yes, in the last 3 years, in England and Wales, they've recruited 46,000 new police, which means 26,000 have left. Well, joining me now is Donna Jones, Conservative Police and Crime Commissioner for Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, and the National Lead for Victims. Donna, on the face of it, this is good news, because it is your party meeting its manifesto commitment, so you must be quite pleased.
Well, I'm relieved. I'm relieved that we got over the line of the 20,000. I think it's 20,951. I was with Suella Braverman this morning and Chris Philp, the policing minister, when the numbers were officially confirmed. But, you know, it's been a tough journey in policing over the last 10 to 12 years. We know that because of austerity. This is largely replacing police officer numbers that have reduced over the years. So there's a real re-establishment that needs to happen now. Yes, more cops is great. We've got very young in-service officers now, though. A third of my force have been in service for less than 3 years. So more cops is good. We need that. Policing is largely a numbers game, but the experience now needs to be gained. Some of them don't know how to investigate crime. They need to learn to do that. And they have spent a lot of the last 3 years sat in the classroom. So actually, I'm really pleased that Suella Braverman, our Home Secretary, has announced the end of the police degree, so it's not compulsory anymore, so we can have those new cops out learning how to arrest people under PACE law and not writing essays about it. Lots to be done, a step in the right direction, but I don't think everyone should be crowing right now.
Yeah, no, Donna, I think that point that you make, and it probably applies to other things like nursing, of not actually doing degrees and being in classrooms, but being out doing things practically, that is a very, very strong point. Do you think, as yet, that your voters in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight are aware of an increased police presence?
In our cities, probably yes. In Portsmouth and Southampton, it's obviously, 60% of our crime comes from those two areas across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. So 2 million people, one of the largest police forces. So some areas, yes, have seen a greater concentration of police officers because, as I say, it's very much crime related. The rural areas are starting to see that now, roads policing unit. So things are trickling through as more officers are coming on board. It's then pushing other officers out into some of those police specialisms, as we call them. Look, it is good news. I am really pleased today that the government have achieved what they set out to do. I'm keeping my fingers crossed now for the next pledge from the Conservatives for the next general election, hoping that that will be an uplift of more police officers. So I do think that the government should be congratulated for this today. Some forces, such as the Metropolitan Police Service, have failed woefully to hit their number. My force, however, has overachieved our number. We had to recruit 498. We've recruited 600 new cops in the last 3 years. But like I say, still a long way to go.
Donna Jones, thank you very much indeed for joining us, giving your thoughts. Peter Blexley, former Met Police detective. Very telling point, I thought, that Donna made there. And there's no doubt, she loves her job and wants to succeed. But she said many of our new police officers, do you hear what she just said? Don't know how to investigate crime. So more cops, but are we better off if a third of her force have literally just left the classroom? It's not as good as it looks, is it?
Yes, it's not just the numbers that got impacted by austerity, because so many experienced cops, when their pay and their pensions and other entitlements got butchered, headed for the exit door. And there was an absolute sea of experience that disappeared, quite simply not to be replaced. And policing is one of those jobs where experience is crucial. So I celebrate the fact that the 20,000 target's been hit today. I'm very glad that Mr Sunak is celebrating Mr Johnson's target being met. but the difficulty is, or maybe, how stridently have these officers been vetted? We know there's been a lot of issues with vetting. Who's trained them and how thorough is that training? A lot of training from various police services has been outsourced.
What Donna was suggesting was that most of the training has been in the classroom.
Yep, indeed. But a good teacher in the classroom can bring practical skills for them to learn from. And thirdly, who's going to escort these puppies? Who's going to do the puppy walking, which is a common expression for taking probationers out in policing? In my day, you would go with an experienced cop who would have the minimum of 5 years, because in my day, they used to say, until you got 5 years in, you don't know what you're doing. And there's some truth to that.
Really?
Yeah. So, yes, I do harbour those concerns. I'm happy the target's been hit. The Met's got a lot of work to do. But it's going to be far from a perfect policing world for a long, long time.
Yeah, and I mean, they say that it's a much more diverse police force, but But let's hope that above all they've recruited on quality, not just to meet yet more targets. But sticking with figures, Peter, for a moment, I was having a look before we came on air at crime figures and looking at the Met's numbers and the government's claims, and I can't work out what's actually happening. I can't work out whether crime is rising, whether crime is falling. Is there any sort of gold standard that we can go to measure what is really happening with crime in this country?
The government will tell you the crime survey of England and Wales.
Yes.
Police will tell you their recorded figures. But if you compare those like it appears you have done, you just end up simply tearing your hair out. I don't think there's any reliable crime stats because so many people have become disillusioned with policing that they come outside their house in the morning, see the window broken on their car and go, what's the point? Nothing will be done.
Well, so actually what you're suggesting, and I think this is right, is a lot of crime now simply doesn't get reported.
Absolutely. Walk through the streets of any city and look at the criminal damage that has been done. Look at the walls that have been daubed. Look at the revolting stuff that tries to call itself graffiti, which is daubed all over our great cities. That's a crime. That's criminal damage. None of that features in any crime stat, I would imagine, because the owners of it just shrug their shoulders, pick up the phone and get somebody to come and jet wash it off, hopefully. Same with the people with their broken windows in their cars. Same with assaults. People get assaulted, and I'm sure that is woefully underreported. People come out of a pub in the evening and get into a dust-up. That's not going to get reported. And, of course, we also know that violence against women and girls that so often happens behind closed doors and to men in terms of domestic violence is chronically underreported, which is why so many lives are horrendously blighted by it. And I urge anybody, if we want to have a true landscape in terms of how much crime is being committed, no matter how minor it is, no matter how frustrating it might be to report it, please do that so we can get an accurate picture.
A real plea there, Peter Blexley, because we do need proper figures. I can't work it out. You can't work it out. It really is a mess. But we must, Peter is right. However hopeless it feels, we must report crime. But hey, you know what? They've met their target, so well done to the government on that. Now, the House of Commons has voted. It's a government majority of 59 for the illegal migration bill. That suggests that there were a few Tory abstentions, but literally only a few. In a moment, we're going to come back and find out why sickness from work figures were the highest last year on record. Have we all gone work shy? Or is it, maybe, after COVID, we just don't come into the office when we're coughing and spluttering?
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News. the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
Right, folks, that was a spicy one, wasn't it?
With us four, plus a special guest.
Sometimes she has to stick her foot in it. Sometimes she has to say things as they are.
Sometimes I think we should keep the refugees and send the pensioners to Rwanda. Then we'd be in a much better state.
Well, Benjamin, that is...
The Saturday 5. Saturday nights from 8. Only on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Well, over 185 million days missed last year from work due to sickness. A graph published, an ONS graph that's been published, shows an alarming rise over the last couple of years in those taking days off work sick. That's after a quite steady decline in that number over the course of the last 20 years. So what is going on? Is it that we've become just completely work shy? Any excuse? We'll take a day off, such as the sun is shining. Some of it, I think, is because in the past, we may well have come into a busy office, coughing and spluttering, spreading germs around the place. And now we think, after the pandemic, you know what? That's just not a very grown-up and a very sensible or responsible thing to do. So that could be part of it. I don't know. I'm not sure what the real reasons are, but I wonder whether Emma Kenny, psychologist, might be able to help me with this. Emma, I think the pandemic has had a big psychological effect upon the country in lots and lots of ways. And it's too easy for me to say, they're all shirkers, they're all hopeless, the slightest twinge, they take a day off. But I wonder whether you agree with me that there is actually slightly more responsibility now when we're at a very infectious stage of a cold or flu, and we say, you know what? I wouldn't be doing anybody a favour by coming into the office.
Yeah, I definitely think that a lot of people are more aware of things like common colds and sniffles. And I also think you have a valid point as well regarding the fact that over the pandemic, people were kind of re-educated to think about health in a different way. And I think people are more anxious about health. I think there's a real hangover of health anxiety. And that means that people don't feel as responsible and accountable when they take a day off. So I think that both of those motivations are why people are choosing not to. But I also think that some people just use it as an excuse. With respect, I genuinely think that whilst some people are dealing with vicarious and secondary trauma to some degree after the pandemic, some people genuinely are really anxious about the way that they feel because of the judgments of others. Because believe me, wow, in the UK, we've found out there's some quite judgmental people when you've got a cold. But also I think that people use it as a very helpful excuse. I'm not coming in now because the power balance has shifted more towards employees than it has been to employers in the past.
Yeah, isn't there also, Emma, and I've certainly noticed this talking to young people, that there seem to be, to me, more young people who talk about work-life balance than perhaps there would have been a couple of decades ago. There seem to be fewer young people prepared to work all the hours God sends for economic success, and they're valuing other things in their lives, rightly or wrongly. I'm not passing judgment on this, but they seem to value this work-life balance thing. They're not prepared to work quite as hard as they used to be.
I mean, I think what's happened is you have pre-1970s where people didn't have technology and you went into work and then you left at a certain time and you had this separation. Then you have the 80s and 90s where the rise of technology means that people start getting things like the yuppie flu, and essentially people start to work longer and longer hours. And you see actually a movement in the corporate world where, for example, working overtime is meant to be considered a normal part of your job, even if you're not remunerated for that. Staying in the office office to all hours when something needs to get sorted out and you're not remunerated for it. That became part of our culture. And then I think as younger people are growing up and thinking, I don't have loyalty towards that particular company anymore, I'm not staying there for 50 years, it means that the employers have to do more. And I've done quite a lot of research with corporate agencies on this. And certainly that's what's coming through, that younger people are saying, I don't want to spend my entire life either tied to a desk or then tied to my electronics at night. I want a better work-life balance. So you're correct that they do want that, but I don't think it's just that they're becoming lazier. It's because there's a return to something that was massively out of balance. To put this into example, I used to work for some very, very big banks and trading companies where I go in and deliver work-life balance, and they used to want me to sign a contract saying I wasn't allowed to suggest not doing overtime because essentially that was part of their culture, which is ludicrous. But if you imagine that that's the mindset of the corporate world in a lot of ways, we've inherited that. And I think young people are saying, no, don't get me wrong, there'll always be laggers. And I think that that's the culture that's endemic now within our system, and certainly has been elevated and amplified through COVID, because it basically told you if you feel anything other than 100%, don't do anything. And that's a terrible kind of suggestion to make. And I think a lot of people are still living with that.
Emma Kenny, thank you very much indeed. And yep, I agree with you. I think they're wise words. Work-life balance. I was asked once on the BBC, at the time I was leading UKIP, we were very busy series of national elections, and I was asked, how many hours a week do you work? And I said, well, if you include the socialising after work, roughly 100 hours a week, which some people thought was good, others didn't. Now, Sadiq Khan, one of our favourite subjects, of course, yes, he has announced recently a talented group to develop an annual celebration of black culture in London. Isn't that marvellous? And one of the people that he's appointed recently, Kemi Olivia Alamoru, well, she looks like an absolute beauty. My goodness gracious me. She's described the Conservative government of being murderers. On Boris Johnson, she said, how does he not get jumped every time he goes out? And Keir Starmer is nothing but a scab. So you can see Sadiq Khan appointing really very, very extreme leftists into positions, and all they'll do, it won't actually help the black community in London. All it'll do is drive a wedge and a divide between the black community, the white community and other groups in London. It is all complete and utter Marxist madness. Andrew Bridgen, Conservative Member of Parliament and quite a regular on this channel. In December in Parliament, he said that a robust data of significant harms and little ongoing benefit meant there should be a complete suspension of the vaccine rollout. Indeed, he wasn't alone, because Denmark took a very similar decision. He then described the COVID vaccine rollout in January as the biggest crime against humanity since the Holocaust. I thought that was an incredibly ill-judged thing to say. No current affairs topic or debate should ever draw comparisons with the Holocaust or Hitler or any of those things. It never works, and it never, ever makes any sense. But it was a misjudgment. He was shouted down by Matt Hancock and others for being anti-Semitic, which very clearly he was not. Today he was expelled from the Conservative Party. I wonder, are you not allowed to even discuss vaccine harms if you're a Tory MP? That is how it looks to me. In a moment, we discuss the sheer madness of high-end shoppers from around the world now going to Paris and Rome rather than shopping in London. Surely the government needs to get a grip.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Hello, I'm Calvin Robinson. Do not miss my Common Sense Crusade Saturdays at 7 p.m. Join me for some in-depth discussions on faith. Is that not the start of the slippery slope?
It's very much so.
And the big moral questions of the day. I'm baffled.
You've got some nerve.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So finally, we left the European Union. Yes, the 31st of March 2020. I was there in Parliament Square, 100,000 people. Hooray! Economic freedom! We can become more competitive. We can encourage more global business. And what does the British government do? Completely the opposite to that when it comes to VAT. I can go to Paris or Rome, and let's say you wanted to buy a very expensive ring. You'd do it in those countries without paying VAT, or you'd pay the VAT and get it reimbursed. But for some reason, when we left the European Union, we decided that we'd put VAT on those products, make sure there was no rebate offered at all. And what it means is we're now losing out on about 3 billion quid's worth of spending. That spending, of course, can be from cruise liners. So you get off a cruise liner in Southampton and walk up the high street. It can be at Heathrow Airport. It can be in Bond Street or whatever. We are losing about 3 billion quid a year on this self-inflicted wound. The political argument against having that rebate is but if a British person wants to buy that expensive ring, they do have to pay the 20% VAT. So we can't be seen as a government to be helping the rich. Politically, I get that argument, but in reality, think how many jobs there are in retail. How many people actually thrive off the back of the fact that people come, they fly to Britain, they come on cruise liners, and they're not spending the money that they were spending before. Well, joining me is Alex Schlagman, co-founder of SaveTheHighStreet.org. The Daily Mail, Alex, have run a pretty effective campaign this week, 100 quite significant businesses, and we've got Heathrow Airport and elsewhere. Can you understand what's going on here?
Well, I think firstly we've got to look at the facts. People are spending significantly less money here than they were before relative to other places in Europe. Significantly. And we're not talking about an incremental change. We're talking about big numbers here. So people are coming less and spending less than they are now in France and Italy particularly. Yeah. But there are numbers in Spain to suggest it. There's effectively a 20% off sign over Europe that we do not have here in the UK. But we do also have to look at what's the impact of this and, of course, what can be done about it. So, impact-wise, we are really talking about a certain segment of the retail market. We're talking a lot about the tourist economy. We're talking particularly around London. We're talking specifically around luxury. Now, the reality is the high street is fundamental to the local economy and community all over the UK. And so we need to be clear that we don't put too much emphasis in whatever funds are available to fixing a problem that only solves something for the few, not the many.
Yeah, I mean, I get that point. I understand that. But, I made the point there are cruise liners that go into Belfast, that go into Southampton. So it isn't just Bond Street, but generally, you're right, generally it is relatively high-end products. But it seems, I don't know how you feel about it. I mean, generally with the high street, with business as a whole, I mean, the Labour Party are actually making some quite positive pledges about business rates, etc. Jeremy Hunt does seem somewhat detached from business.
Well, look, there's a bigger picture here going on. And what Jeremy's got to get his head around, Rishi included, is that the challenge is not going to get solved by one policy. We look at the tourist situation going on at the moment, Nigel, and Oxford Street's been decimated. And the major department stores are lying empty, sucking life out of the centres. And this is not a London-specific thing either. 60% of the old Debenhams are still lying empty. 48% of the old House of Frasers still lying empty. Fixing those kind of problems is going to give people reasons to come and reasons to spend.
Well, let's hope they do. Alex, thank you very much indeed for joining me. Now, joining me now is Paul Key, who has been involved over the years with airports, running big, major airports. And I guess, as we walk through the airport and we see the aftershave and the perfumes and all the things we can buy, the idea that we haven't got to pay 20% VAT is rather attractive. How much damage is this doing to retail in British airports?
I think it's doing a lot of damage. Good evening, Nigel, by the way. It's doing a lot of damage. If I look at the industry, aviation provides us with our economic air bridge to the world. If you damage that, you damage the UK economy. It's fundamental. Government should be looking at a strategy that says, this is how we will connect with the world, this is how we will bring people in, and this is how we'll reinvigorate our high streets. It's a joined-up product. It's over 150 billion. It was forecast by 2025, pre-COVID, that tourism would be 10-12% of the UK economy. It's an economy that we can quickly increase. But the challenge is we've sort of forgotten about it. And there are significant challenges in aviation with the environment, of course, with fuel costs. But if we can get people coming into our country, where I am today, in the Northumberland, going to Berwick-upon-Tweed, the high street is full of charity shops. It needs to be vibrant. We need to have tourism across the piece. And government can unlock that very simply.
That's the point, isn't it? That tourists coming into Britain, it isn't just Bond Street. They travel all around the country. And I get that point. Why, oh why, when this is so blooming obvious, is Jeremy Hunt just not listening? Do you have any idea?
No, I don't. And I have been on national media before saying that government really should focus on ensuring that we are the most popular destination. We're 7th in the world, yet we have the most beautiful country, some fantastic resorts and locations that people could come to and spend their their dollars, and make our life better by employing people. And we just don't seem to get it. We seem to focus on the wrong things, and yet this is a quick fix.
Yeah, and I mean, I have to say, though, there have been others that have made this argument. Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, in that budget, I know it didn't last very long, but in that budget, they did propose changing this particular tax. And I think it goes to show that whilst they may have tried to do too much too soon, they might have spooked the markets. They did actually have some rather good ideas. But a thought, please, from you, Paul, on the Daily Mail campaign. It looks to be pretty effective. It looks to have big support from business across the piece. And I just wonder whether that might perhaps just tip the balance.
It's a quick fix. It's a quick win. And if I think of my time when I was at UK airports, to give you a very brief example, a European passenger would spend £10. A Southeast Asian passenger would spend £90. And if we can get more of those passengers coming to our cities, they will spend. They like the provenance of the products that we sell at Bicester Village or wherever we sell them. They like those things to take back and tell their friends they've been to Britain, they've had a great time, and they've bought great products, and they've brought them home, and they've provided this economy with an injection of enthusiasm and positivity that we sorely need. And I believe we can do that very quickly.
Yep, so do I. I think this campaign's one that... I think this campaign's winnable. I genuinely do. And Paul, I thank you for coming on the programme and joining me this evening. Thank you very much indeed. It is time for our Barrage the Farages. First up, I've got Paul.
Hi, Nigel. This is Paul Atkin. I live in Bexhill. One of the questions I'd like to ask, if this North Eye scheme goes through, what do you think about increasing the presence of the police in this area?
Right, for those that don't know what Paul was talking about, North Eye is a former military camp, a former training centre just to the north of Bexhill. And one of the proposals is that it'll take 1,200 migrants. A couple of comments on it. The first is North Eye camp at the moment is in the most dreadful state, so it'll need a fair bit of work to be habitable to any degree at all. Secondly, if you think 1,200's a lot, well, on August the 22nd last year, 1,295 people crossed the channel. It shows you the magnitude of what we're facing. We will be overwhelmed by the summer. And Paul, you know, I've been saying it and getting abuse for it. The Home Secretary is now saying it. But if you get a lot of young men coming from cultures in which women aren't even treated as second-class citizens, don't be surprised if you get a negative result. So yes, you have every right there in East Sussex to demand more policing. You really, really do. Next up, we have Julie.
Hi, my name is Julie, and I'd like to ask Nigel, why have you taken a step away from politics? We need you right now back in this. You're the only person who can stand up for us. Our MP has deserted us. You are the person who could sort this out. Come back to politics.
Julie, thank you very much. It's ever so sweet of you. I did do it for an extraordinary number of years. I really started campaigning in earnest in 1993. I got into the European Parliament in 1999. I left at the end of January, memorably at least for me, in January 2020. So I did it for a heck of a long time at a literally enormous cost to myself, enormous cost in a lot of different ways. And I did achieve the key objective. My key objective was I felt the entire political establishment were facing in the wrong direction on a major constitutional issue, and I felt only by fighting from outside the existing parties could I create something big enough to make them change. And you know what, Julie? I did that. I won't forever rule out getting back into politics, but right now I'm pretty happy where I am and trying and hoping that through GB News we can also shift and change agendas. Now he's here, hot foot, from the House of Commons, where the government have won with a majority of 59. Jacob Rees-Mogg, easy day for the government.
Well, indeed. And Nigel, thank you for being willing to stand in for me, because I thought we might be voting for another hour and then I would have missed the programme. But it's a good day for the government. It's a really powerful message to the House of Lords, because I'm worried about what the Lords will try and do to this bill. But it's a solid majority, a democratic mandate, and it may be, whisper this quietly, that at last we've got a policy that can deal with the small boats and the European Court of Human Rights.
I think on the House of Lords, I think your point's strong, because there's no question that the Brexit vote and an 80-seat majority, one of the key drivers of all of this was controlling our borders. Now, you know, 500,000 net migration, all of that's not what we voted for, but it's quite tough for the Lords to say that the government hasn't got a strong mandate to control borders. Whether it actually deals with ECHR and those other problems, whether it is compatible, I mean, they're all things that we're going to find out over the course of time. The rebels seem to sort of melt away, but Tim Loughton's and others today...
Yes.
Did they abstain?
I assume they abstained. I haven't had a chance to look at the voting lists, but a majority of 55 means there would have been very few, if any, voting against.
Yeah. And Labour's position on this?
Labour's position's difficult, because actually they would like the small boats dealt with. But they've got a lot of international lawyers and people who love human rights in their party, and they like the political correctness. So they're quite torn, and they know when looking at the Red Wall that they'll never win that back if we don't deal with immigration.
Well, that's absolutely right. Well, Jacob's up in a moment, but first, let's get the all-important weather.
Good evening. This is Alex Deakin with your latest weather update. It is going to turn warmer over the next few days, leading into a mixed picture for the long weekend. There will be some sunshine, but there'll also be some heavy showers. could well be some heavy rain tomorrow from this little weather system pushing up from the southwest. Ahead of it, we've got another weather front bringing increasing cloud and maybe a little rain to the north coast of Northern Ireland and the west coast of Scotland by morning. Bit of drizzle in the southwest, the odd shower elsewhere, but for most it's a dry night. Clearer spells across the heart of the country will allow it to turn quite chilly. The coldest conditions in northern Scotland, where a frost is again likely. Elsewhere will be down into single digits. So a chilly start to Thursday, but we should see some brighter skies compared to today over North Wales and northern England, at least for a time, but generally clouding over again. Wet